All right, ready to jump into this deep dive. We've got AMI Organics annual report on deck, and this company is really interesting. They're all about those pharmaceutical intermediates and specialty chemicals.
Yeah, sounds good.
So today, we're going to kind of like take apart their business model
Okay.
and really try to figure out like where they stand in the whole competitive landscape and what their potential for growth looks like. We're also going to peek into their sustainability efforts and any recent developments.
Sounds good.
What really jumps out at me about AMI Organics
Mhm.
right from the start is how they've really honed in on this specific niche. They're focused on like over 550 pharmaceutical intermediates.
Right.
And it's not just any intermediates, it's like they're really concentrating on the high growth, high margin stuff.
Yeah, the ones related to chronic conditions.
Exactly. Think antidepressants, anti-cancer drugs, antiretrovirals, treatments for Parkinson's, even medications for seizure disorders.
Exactly, yeah. What's immediately fascinating is like how they've carved out that niche. It's smart because, these are areas where there's a consistent and long-term need,
Absolutely.
especially when you think about how the global pharmaceutical market is expected to grow, like at a 6.5% rate until 2028.
Yeah, so they're really tapping into areas with a consistent long-term need. So smart.
Right. And what's even more interesting is the Indian API industry.
Yeah, where AMI Organics is based.
Exactly. They're actually projected to grow even faster.
Really? Well,
Yeah, at almost 11% annually between 2023 and 2028.
that's crazy. What's driving that kind of growth?
I think a few things, right? Like we've got the aging global population. We see a rise in chronic diseases. There's increased healthcare awareness. You've got the Indian government really promoting the industry's growth,
Uh-huh.
like through initiatives like the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme.
Oh, okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's a significant tailwind for a company like AMI Organics.
Right, so I think before we go any further, we should probably just, for anyone who may not be familiar, take a quick second and just define what exactly pharmaceutical intermediates are and how they fit into, like, the bigger picture of, the whole drug-making process.
Yeah, for sure. So imagine like a puzzle, a really complex puzzle, and the final picture is a life-saving drug, right?
Okay.
Pharmaceutical intermediates are like the individual pieces of that puzzle. They're those specialized chemicals that are like essential building blocks for creating the drugs.
Okay, that's a great analogy. Makes it really easy to understand.
Yeah, it's a multi-step process, and these are like the key ingredients.
Got it. So basically, AMI Organics is making these essential pieces of the puzzle, so to speak. And speaking of the bigger picture, let's look at the competitive landscape. So the Indian API industry, from what I'm seeing in the report, seems pretty fragmented.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, super
I think
fragmented.
they said something like 500 manufacturers.
Yeah, a lot of players.
So how does AMI Organics stand out in such a crowded space?
That's the key, right? And their strategy really seems to be about like differentiation and focusing on those high value areas.
Okay.
The report doesn't say exactly what their market share is, but you can kind of get a sense that
Yeah.
their diverse product portfolio and that choice to really double down on high growth segments tells you they're not just surviving, they're actually thriving in this industry.
Right. They're not just another face in the crowd.
Yeah.
But, to thrive in any competitive market, you need to have a strong advantage, something that sets you apart.
For sure. You've got to have that edge.
So what does AMI Organics have? What gives them that competitive edge?
I think one of their biggest assets is customer loyalty. You see it right in the report. They have over 30 customers that have been with them for more than a decade.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right. That speaks volumes about their relationships. It shows they're not just turning out chemicals.
Yeah, they're building partnerships.
Exactly. And they're investing heavily in R&D that allows them to create like a wide range of products and really think about future needs.
Okay.
And then you combine that with, how specialized their products are.
Uh-huh.
And it creates like a really high barrier to entry for anyone else trying to enter the market. It's not easy to just jump into this industry.
So they've got a super loyal customer base, they've got a really diverse portfolio of products, and they've got a big head start in R&D. So those are all fantastic advantages.
Yes, for sure.
But let's talk about the other side of the coin now. Risks. Every business has them.
Absolutely. Got to consider the downsides too.
What are some of the key risks or concerns that AMI Organics faces?
Well, the report's pretty upfront about environmental risks.
Right. Those are huge in the chemical industry.
For sure. And they're acknowledging that and taking steps to address it.
Like what?
They talk about a zero liquid discharge plant. They've got reverse osmosis plants. They even have a soil biological treatment system.
Wow, they're going all out.
Yeah, and they're making a point of saying that all their manufacturing units have achieved ISO certifications.
Okay, so they're really trying to walk the walk when it comes to environmental responsibility.
Absolutely. They're taking it seriously.
But were there any, red flags raised by the auditors, anything that jumped out at them as a potential concern?
The auditors did mention a decrease in return on capital employed, the ROCE,
Okay.
and the profit after tax margin in fiscal year 24. They're saying it's because of increased capital employed, like investments that haven't fully paid off yet. So that's something to watch, you know?
It's like they're planting seeds, but they haven't blossomed yet.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the future.
Right. Now, shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about corporate governance. Transparency and ethical practices are super important, especially for a company in a sensitive industry like pharmaceuticals.
Oh, for sure. It's got to be top of mind for them.
What are some of the things AMI Organics is doing to ensure that they're operating ethically and transparently?
I mean, they really emphasize their commitment to good corporate governance throughout the report. They talk about their compliance with laws and SEBI regulations, the experience and diversity on their board of directors. They highlight all these different committees they have, like audit, stakeholder relationships, risk management. They even have a dedicated ESG committee.
So they're checking all the boxes when it comes to transparency and ethical conduct.
Yeah, it seems like they're really trying to do things right.
Now, speaking of leadership, I'm curious, were there any significant changes at the top, like any new additions to the executive team or the board?
Yeah, there was one big change. Mr. Ram Mohan Lakhande, he joined as a whole-time director and their chief risk officer back in 2022. His background is really interesting: production, project scale-ups, technology transfer.
Oh, wow. So it's like they're bringing in expertise as they grow.
Yeah, strategically adding to their leadership team makes sense given all their plans for expansion and growth.
Absolutely. So they're gearing up for some exciting developments. Now, before we move on to those developments, let's talk about sustainability. It's become such a crucial aspect for any company, but especially one operating in an industry like chemicals.
Totally. It's more than just a buzzword now. It's a core value for a lot of businesses.
So how is AMI Organics addressing this increasingly important area? What are they doing to make sure their operations are sustainable?
Well, their commitment to sustainability is pretty obvious throughout the report.
Okay, good.
They're really focused on maximizing their use of natural resources, minimizing waste, and, just generally reducing their environmental footprint.
So they're thinking about the big picture.
Yeah, they're not just looking at the immediate impact, they're thinking long-term.
What are some specific examples of how they're putting this commitment into practice?
Well, they talk about having green belts at their plants. They also highlight a high rate of zero liquid discharge at their Sachin unit. And they've got these plans to really ramp up their use of renewable energy with solar power plants coming online in fiscal year 25.
Wow, so they're actively working on a multi-pronged approach to sustainability. It's not just one thing. They're addressing it from multiple angles.
Exactly. It seems like they're really trying to embed sustainability into every aspect of their business.
That's great to see. Now, looking ahead, what's the growth potential for AMI Organics? Where do they see themselves heading in the future?
Well, they're definitely in a sweet spot right now, poised to benefit from that expanding global pharmaceutical market and, of course, that booming Indian API industry we were talking about earlier.
Right. It's almost like they're riding a wave.
Yeah, they're in the right place at the right time. But they're not stopping there. They're also eyeing the specialized semiconductor chemical market.
Oh, interesting. So they're not content with just riding that pharmaceutical wave. They're looking for new avenues for growth.
Exactly. They're thinking about the long game and exploring new opportunities, and they've been making some really bold moves to capitalize on these opportunities. We should definitely dive into those next.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. I'm really curious to hear about what they've been up to.
Okay, so you mentioned those bold moves. What were you thinking of?
Well, I remember reading about a new subsidiary, something about Baba Advanced Materials Limited.
Yeah, that's right. They created this wholly owned subsidiary, Baba Advanced Materials, and it's all about the semiconductor industry.
So they're not messing around. They're really serious about getting into that market.
Oh, yeah. And there was also that acquisition.
Oh, right. What was that about again?
They snagged a 55% controlling stake in this company called Baba Fine Chemicals.
Okay.
And they're all about these high-purity photoresist chemicals.
But you're like, what What are those?
They're essential for making semiconductors.
Oh, okay, got it.
So yeah, it's a clear sign that they're serious about diversifying and becoming a big player in this whole semiconductor world.
Wow. It's really fascinating how they're making these moves. But before we get too far ahead, I just want to step back for a second, like really understand the core of their business.
Okay.
So when we talk about those pharmaceutical intermediates that IME Organics produces, what are we actually talking about? Like, what specific kinds of products do they make?
Yeah, so they actually develop and commercialize a super diverse range of intermediates, over 500.
Wow.
Think of it like instead of just providing generic building blocks, they're actually making those specialized ingredients for like complex pharmaceutical recipes.
Oh, okay.
And remember, their focus is on those high growth, high margin segments we were talking about, those medications for chronic conditions.
Right, the antidepressants and like the anti-cancer drugs and everything.
Exactly. They're catering to that specific demand, which is smart.
It is smart, but it also makes me think, like, what if something happens to those markets?
Right. What if there's a disruption?
Yeah, what if some new technology comes along or those markets just, like, become saturated? Wouldn't that leave them vulnerable?
That's a good point. And I think that's where the whole diversification strategy comes in.
Okay.
By getting into the semiconductor market, they're basically hedging their bets.
Right.
If one sector starts to struggle, the other one can kind of pick up the slack. It's all about balancing those priorities, right?
Yeah, makes sense. So they're specializing to be profitable, but diversifying to, like, build resilience.
Exactly. They're playing the long game here, laying the groundwork for sustainable growth.
That's awesome. And speaking of sustainability, they talk a lot about those initiatives in their report.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
What are some of the specific things they're doing to, like, actually reduce their environmental impact?
They're tackling it from all sides. Like, for starters, they're really big on energy efficiency.
Okay.
For example, at their brine plant, they've installed those variable frequency drives, the VFDs.
VFDs, okay.
It basically lets them control their energy consumption super precisely. Imagine it like a dimmer switch for a light.
Oh, I get it. So they're not just wasting energy, they're only using what they need.
Exactly. And they've also switched out a lot of their older equipment, the stuff that wasn't as efficient, with new technology.
Okay.
They're using those air tray freeze dryer machines now.
It's air tray freeze dryer.
Yeah, the ATFD machines, and they use way less power compared to their old reactors and filters and dryers.
So they're basically getting granular with their energy management.
Yeah, and it's not just about energy. They've got a whole water conservation strategy, too.
Wow.
They've upgraded their air conditioning to more efficient models and like really improved their steam condensate water recovery system. And of course, don't forget about those solar power plants.
Right. Those are a big deal.
Yeah. Those are going to be up and running in Gujarat by fiscal year 25 and should cover something like 90% of their electricity needs.
Wow. So they're really putting their money where their mouth is when it comes to sustainability. That's awesome.
For sure. They're definitely walking the walk. But let's switch gears for a sec and talk about their financials.
Okay, yeah.
What numbers really stood out to you when you were reading through the report?
Well, I immediately noticed their debt-to-equity ratio.
Oh, yeah. How is that looking?
Really healthy. It's only 0.32,
Wow, that's great.
which basically tells me they're not overly reliant on debt, which is good.
For sure. It gives them more flexibility, especially with things like interest rate hikes.
Right, exactly. So financially, they seem to be in a pretty strong position. But what about profitability overall? Like, are they actually making money?
Well, their revenue went up by a good amount, about 16.3%.
Okay, not bad.
But their EBITDA only rose by like 4.8%.
Interesting.
And like we talked about earlier, the auditors did flag that decrease in their ROCE and their PAT margin.
Right, because of those investments that haven't quite paid off yet.
Exactly. But overall, I think their financials show a company that's like being responsible with their money.
Yeah, and building a good foundation for future growth.
For sure. Now, you mentioned corporate governance earlier, and one thing that stood out to me was their emphasis on ethical practices.
Oh, yeah, they definitely seem to be serious about that.
They've got a clear code of conduct for their employees.
All right.
And they also have this whistleblower policy.
With that?
It basically encourages their employees to report any like unethical or illegal stuff without being scared of getting in trouble.
Oh, that's really important, especially in an industry like this.
Yeah, you want people to feel comfortable speaking up. And their commitment to good corporate governance goes even further.
How so?
They're really on top of complying with all the laws and regulations. They've got that diverse and experienced board of directors, and they've got this whole committee structure, with dedicated committees for audit, risk management, stakeholder relationships, and even ESG.
Wow, they've really got everything covered. It sounds like they're really trying to do things by the book.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial, especially in this day and age. Now, earlier we were talking about how they're not just relying on the pharmaceutical industry for growth. They're actively seeking out new opportunities,
Right.
like their foray into the semiconductor market.
Yeah, that was a big move.
What are your thoughts on that? What do you see as the potential benefits and challenges of that strategic decision?
Well, I think the benefits are pretty clear. The global semiconductor market is like exploding right now.
Yeah, it's huge.
Everyone needs electronic devices. Plus, there's all these new technologies emerging like AI and 5G.
Absolutely. So it's a market with massive growth potential, and for Ami Organics, it's a chance to diversify their revenue streams.
Right. So they're not so dependent on the pharmaceutical industry.
Exactly. They're spreading the risk.
But what about the challenges?
Yeah.
What are some of the obstacles they might face trying to break into this new market?
Well, it's a totally different world, right? It's incredibly competitive, technologically advanced, and requires a ton of investment in R&D.
Oh, for sure. And they don't really have any experience in this area, do they?
Well, not directly, no. But remember, they did acquire that controlling stake in Bobifine Chemicals.
Right, right. The company that specializes in those photoresist chemicals.
Exactly. So they're leveraging that acquisition to kind of get a foothold in the market.
Okay, so they're not starting from scratch.
Not completely, no. But they'll still need to work hard to adapt and build those new capabilities.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's a bold move, but it seems like they're being strategic about it. They're not just jumping in blindly.
Right. They're doing their homework and trying to minimize the risk.
Now, something else I wanted to touch on, they talk a lot about their commitment to their employees in the report.
Yeah, they really emphasize the importance of their people.
What are some of the things they're doing to create a positive work environment and, attract and keep top talent?
Well, they're really big on employee development.
Okay, that's good.
They've got all sorts of training programs to help people learn new skills and advance their careers. They also talk a lot about diversity and inclusion.
Oh, that's fantastic.
They really believe that a diverse team brings a lot of different perspectives and experiences to the table.
Makes sense. It makes the company stronger in the long run.
Exactly. But they also care about the more practical stuff, like work-life balance and benefits. They're very focused on safety, especially at their Sachin facility, which is ISO 45001 certified.
So they're not just paying lip service to this stuff.
Yeah.
They're actually taking concrete steps to make sure their employees are happy and well taken care of.
Right, and they have a really comprehensive accident management system, too, and they really encourage employees to speak up if they see any safety concerns.
Oh, wow. So they're really walking the walk when it comes to creating a safe and supportive work environment. But amidst all these positives, are there any areas where you think Ami Organics might face some challenges or roadblocks in the future?
That's a good question. I mean, no business is perfect, right? And while they've taken steps to address those environmental risks we talked about, those risks are still going to be there. It's just the nature of the industry.
Right. You can't eliminate those risks completely.
And then attracting and retaining top talent is going to be a big deal for them going forward.
Makes sense. You need the right people to make all these ambitious plans a reality.
Exactly. And of course, like any company, they're exposed to financial risks, market fluctuations, economic downturns, that kind of thing.
Right. You can't control everything.
Nope. But I think what's important is how they're addressing these risks proactively.
Like with their diversification strategy.
Yeah, exactly. By expanding into the semiconductor market, they're basically creating a more resilient business model. They're less reliant on the pharmaceutical industry alone.
And their commitment to sustainability plays a big role in that too.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about doing good for the planet, it's about making smart business decisions. By investing in renewable energy and reducing their environmental footprint, they're appealing to environmentally conscious investors and customers and positioning themselves for the future.
Right. It's a win-win. It's good for business and good for the world. So it seems like they've got a lot of things working in their favor. A solid business model. They're in high-growth markets. They're focused on innovation and sustainability, and they're taking steps to mitigate risk. It all sounds pretty compelling.
Yeah, it really does. But it's important to remember that past performance doesn't guarantee future results. You never know what the future holds.
Very true. There are always external factors and unforeseen circumstances that can come into play. But based on what we've seen today, I'd say AMI Organics is on a pretty good path. Now, I'm curious about one specific area, their research and development.
Oh yeah, R&D is key for any company that wants to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. How much are they investing in this area, and what are they getting out of it?
They have a dedicated R&D facility, and last year they poured INR 141 million into R&D. That's a serious commitment.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
And they've got a team of 118 R&D professionals, all working on developing new products and processes. Plus, they already hold 10 patents.
So they're not just resting on their laurels, they're actively looking for ways to improve and expand their offerings.
Absolutely. And it's paying off. They secured 5 new process patents just in the last year. That kind of innovation is crucial for staying competitive in these fast-paced industries.
For sure. It's a race to the top, and they're clearly in it to win it. And their investment in renewable energy is another example of that forward-thinking mindset.
Oh yeah, they're setting a great example for other companies in their industry. It's not just about being ethical, it's about being smart. By reducing their dependence on fossil fuels, they're protecting themselves from future price volatility and becoming more cost competitive in the long run.
It's a win-win all around. It's good for the planet, good for their bottom line, and it sends a strong message to their investors and customers that they're a responsible and forward-thinking organization.
Couldn't agree more. And it all comes back to that commitment to continuous improvement.
Yeah, they seem to be always looking for ways to do things better, whether it's optimizing their processes, enhancing efficiency, or reducing their environmental impact.
Exactly. They're not settling for the status quo. And this drive to improve isn't limited to their sustainability efforts. They've also got this really comprehensive business continuity and disaster management plan in place.
Oh, right. To make sure their operations can keep running smoothly, even as...
And anticipating potential problems. They're taking steps to protect their business and their employees.
That's really smart, especially in an industry like chemical manufacturing, where there are inherent risks.
Yeah, it's all about risk management. By addressing those potential challenges before they become major problems, they're building a more resilient and sustainable business model.
It's impressive how thoughtfully they've approached all of this. They're not just reacting to trends, they're actively shaping their future.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that brings us back to their expansion into the semiconductor market.
Right. We touched on it earlier, but I'd love to dive a little deeper. What exactly prompted this move? And how do they plan to make their mark in this new arena?
Well, it's a huge opportunity, right? The semiconductor market is booming, and they clearly want a piece of the action.
And it's a big commitment, too. They're not just dipping their toes in the water. They're diving head first.
Exactly. But how do they plan to navigate all the complexities of this new market? What are the specific steps they're taking to make sure they succeed?
Those are the million-dollar questions. It'll be fascinating to see how this all plays out for them.
For sure. It's a bold move, and it speaks volumes about their entrepreneurial spirit and their willingness to embrace new challenges.
Absolutely. And one thing that's been really striking throughout this whole deep dive is their commitment to transparency. Their annual report is incredibly detailed and open. They're not holding anything back.
I know. They're laying it all out there. They're clearly confident in what they're doing.
It's refreshing to see a company that's so willing to share its story with the world. But before we wrap things up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about their focus on those high-growth, high-margin segments in the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah, that laser focus on those specific areas.
Exactly. What are the long-term implications of that strategy, both good and bad?
It's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
It's definitely a smart move in the short term. They're capitalizing on that growing demand and maximizing their profits. But what happens if those markets change?
Right. Like we were talking about earlier, what if new technologies come along or those markets become saturated?
Well, that's where their diversification strategy comes in again.
Okay. So by expanding into semiconductors, they're kind of hedging their bets again.
Exactly. They're creating a more robust business model that can adapt to changing market conditions.
So they're thinking ahead and trying to anticipate future challenges.
Yep. They're playing the long game, and that's really smart. Now, I think it's time for me to throw out a final thought-provoking question for our listeners to ponder.
Oh, I love a good brain teaser. Hit me with it.
So, given their ambitious growth plans and their expansion into these new markets, how do you think they're going to manage the challenges of scaling up their operations while still staying true to their commitment to sustainability and ethical practices?
That's a great question. It's definitely a delicate balance. They'll need to find a way to grow without compromising their values.
Exactly. It'll be fascinating to see how they handle this balancing act as they continue to evolve.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what the future holds for them. But based on everything we've learned today, I'm optimistic. They seem to have a good head on their shoulders and a genuine commitment to doing things the right way.
I agree. I think they're definitely a company to watch.
Okay, so we've really dug deep into AMI Organics, their annual report, their whole story.
Mhm.
They're in those high growth areas. They talk a lot about sustainability. And of course, we can't forget about that whole semiconductor move.
Oh, yeah, that was big.
But I want to circle back real quick to something we were discussing earlier about their focus on those specific therapeutic areas within the pharma world.
Right, those niche
It
areas.
seems like a good move, at least for now, for profitability. But could it also backfire?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a bit of a balancing act. Specializing in those essential components for chronic condition meds, it guarantees demand because people need those meds long term. And that means a nice, steady revenue stream for AMI Organics.
Okay, so it's a pretty stable market, at least right now. But things change, right? What if something disrupts those specific areas? Like, what if new technologies emerge?
That's the risk, for sure. But that's where their diversification strategy comes into play. By branching out into semiconductors, they're creating a safety net, just in case. If one sector hits a rough patch, the other one can potentially help them stay afloat.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket.
Exactly. And it's not just random diversification. They're choosing markets with huge potential for growth.
But juggling those different markets, it can't be easy, right? Each one has its own challenges.
Oh, absolutely. Different dynamics, regulations, competitors. It's a lot to manage. For AMI Organics to really succeed with this expansion, they're going to need to be adaptable.
Learn as they go.
Yeah. They'll have to build new capabilities while still playing to their existing strengths.
It's like walking a tightrope, Specialization on one side, diversification on the other.
That's a great analogy. And it's not just about markets either. It's about staying ahead of the game when it comes to innovation and sustainability. Both pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, they're constantly evolving.
AMI Organics can't afford to just stand still.
Right. They have to keep investing in R&D if they want to stay competitive.
It makes sense. But with all this going on, expansion, diversification, R&D, can they realistically stay focused on sustainability? Something they talk a lot about, but can they actually walk the walk as they grow?
Well, that's the big challenge, isn't it? Scaling up often leads to new environmental pressures. But for AMI Organics, it seems like sustainability is more than just a nice to have. It's part of their DNA.
Right, it's embedded in their business strategy.
Yeah, and we've seen how they're tackling things like renewable energy, water conservation, waste reduction. But to really make it work long term, they'll need to keep investing in those efforts even as they expand.
So their success isn't just about making money.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between growth, profitability, and responsibility.
Well said. That pretty much wraps up our deep dive into AMI Organics. What a journey.
It's been fascinating, right? We've seen how they're strategically positioned in these high-growth markets, how committed they are to innovation and sustainability, how willing they are to take on new challenges.
We've looked at their business model, the competitive landscape, their governance practices, their sustainability initiatives. But most importantly, I think we've given you, our listener, a good foundation for understanding this company.
And that's what we're all about, right? We don't just want to tell you what to think. We want to give you the tools to think for yourself.
So whether you're a seasoned investor or just someone who's curious about the business world, we hope this deep dive has been insightful and, maybe even sparked some new ideas.
Don't stop here, though. If you're really intrigued by AMI Organics, check out their full annual report. Stay informed about their progress and, most importantly, keep asking questions.
Because the best insights are often the ones we discover ourselves. So keep digging deeper, keep exploring, and join us next time for another deep dive adventure.